G'day guys, welcome back to Going Deep with Brett English. Today we're joined with Georgia Rose.
Hello.
Thank you for coming down. How did this line of work first unfold for you?
Somatic therapy?
Yeah.
Well, actually I got into it because I was looking for ways to heal my own trauma and what I was doing wasn't working. So I called a somatic therapist that I'd heard of years before but never followed through with it, and their name just kind of popped into my mind, and when I went and saw her for a session, and she said to me, you know, like, knowing that I was already a Tantra practitioner, she said, I think this would be a really good complement to the work that you're already doing, because the session blew my mind. And there happened to be a training coming up with her mentor. So I went ahead and signed up straight away for the training. Yeah, wow. So it was inspired through my own healing, but then I got so much out of it that I wanted to then be able to share that with other people.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. How does it actually work? Like, what do you expect when you're going into a session for somatic therapy release?
Well, it could look a lot of different ways depending on the practitioner and also depending on the intention of the client. But basically, you would have a chat with the practitioner about whatever's going on for you. So obviously you'd have some kind of intention why you would want to explore somatic therapy, whether there's a challenge or a trauma or something that you feel you can't quite shift in your life, or a difficulty or something you want support around. And then when there is a clear intention, then usually, I mean, I'll just speak for myself, then I know where to start guiding the session. And rather than just keeping it more cognitive and mental based where we're talking about stuff, I would also be noticing the client's body language and, like, do you notice that you just did this, or that your leg is now twitching, or kind of bringing their awareness to how their body is speaking while they are verbally speaking. And a lot of the time people say, oh no, I had no idea that I was doing that. But then we usually will take the exploration into the body. So it would be looking at noticing posture, movement, sensation, emotion, and allowing some deeper processing to happen around what people are experiencing or talking about, where usually we'll discuss what we're consciously aware of, but our body tends to reveal what we're not conscious of. So it's a gateway into unconscious exploration, like going beneath the tip of the iceberg, where a lot of, like, the really, really significant realizations and change will usually happen.
Amazing. Now I get it. I got to book in a session. And when it comes to attachment styles, which I saw that you were doing a few videos of that on it, how do you find your attachment style, and what are the options? Like, what kind of attachment styles do you see out there with people?
So there's a really cool quiz that I like to recommend to people by Diane Poole-Heller, who's an expert in attachment theory. And you just go through and answer the questions as best you can, and it'll give you a little result at the end. That's one way that I like to refer to people to find out what their attachment style is. Cool. But there's also some sort of indicators or typical sort of traits or feelings that people would have depending on which attachment style they experience. And we're not just, most people don't just have one attachment style. There will be multiple different ways that they attach depending on circumstance, person and environment, so as well as life stage. So did that answer your question?
It kind of did, because, like, I fluctuate myself between anxious attachment style and then avoidant. And I saw your post about disorganized attachment. I'm like, that sounds more like me. You know, because it's like sort of jumping between the two. Which is quite interesting. But is there a difference between disorganized attachment style and the anxious and avoidant, or how does disorganized come into play?
So that's a really good question, because a lot of people think that they're disorganized because they experience anxious and avoidant tendencies. So there is a key factor that differentiates the two. So they may look kind of similar, fluctuating between anxious and avoidant, which is the sort of push-pull, come here, go away, sort of, I want to be close to you, but now that you're here, I want you to back off and I need my space and freedom. So some people will experience that fluctuation. But disorganized attachment is, so if I backtrack a little bit, can I give a little rundown of anxious, avoidant, and then disorganized to make this make more sense? So with anxious attachment, someone will be preoccupied with wanting to get closer to a certain individual, whether that's a relative, friend or partner or whoever it is. And there's a preoccupation with the other person, and how do I need to be in order to win your approval? And there's this sort of sense of anxiety. Are we connected? Do they like me? There's a real hypervigilance around the possibility of rejection and trying to adapt themselves, like becoming like a chameleon to avoid rejection and to win love in some way. So that's kind of like a little nutshell of what, I mean, I could talk about it for the whole podcast, but that's like a little nutshell, some key qualities. Then avoidant attachment would be more so focused on maintaining their own space, freedom and independence. So when connection comes close, there's usually a fear of I'm going to lose my independence, or I'm going to lose my sense of self, I'm going to lose myself, so I need to put a wall up between me and you so that I can stay connected to me. And there's more focus on themselves, whereas anxious are more other focused. Were you going to say something then?
No.
Okay.
I was just checking the batteries on my mic, that's all.
Oh, okay.
I do that every now and then, so.
Okay, cool, no worries. So you can flip between these two, and a lot of people will be like, oh, you know, how come when I want someone, they don't want me? Or when someone wants me, I'm not interested in them. And that's kind of typical of those attachment styles. So with anxious, you've got a fear of rejection. With avoidant, you've got more so a fear of loss of freedom or loss of independence. And with disorganized attachment, usually they will experience both, where there's a desperation to get closer, but also a desperation to get away. And the tendency is that they will not just be afraid of rejection and intimacy, but there can be a fear of the person themselves that they're connected with.
Okay.
So disorganized attachment typically comes about when you've got a caregiver that is frightening. And it's our instinctive drive to attach, to stay connected. But it's like, I need to be close to you, but you're also a threat. So then usually they'll experience that with other people. I really want to be close to you, but I'm also terrified of you. Also terrified of rejection and intimacy, but you're also a threat to me. Does that
makes a lot of sense? Yeah. Because I've been experiencing that my whole life. I was always just my ego in the beginning, sort of wanting to win validation, getting validation, like, next. But maybe it was an anxious and avoidant attachment style.
Possibly. Or
my ego, or both. I don't know, but yeah. That's very interesting. Okay. There's another one I want to talk to you about, and that is building security and intimacy in a relationship. But it's a two-part question.
Yes.
Why do people stay in relationships that are obviously toxic and abusive?
Yes.
And how can they go about building security and intimacy within that, or healing that relationship?
Within a toxic or abusive relationship?
Yeah, it was a bit of a two-part question, but you can answer one first and the other if you want.
Yeah, so let's go with the first one. So why is it that people stay in toxic or abusive relationships? So there's a couple of reasons for this. I mean, it's a pretty massive topic, but typically speaking, people will be drawn towards toxic or abusive relationships because there's some sort of familiarity to relationships that they've had in their developmental years when they're growing up. So if you have a caregiver or a sibling or someone quite close and influential to you in your childhood years, then that influences the associations that we have around love, connection, relationship, and also what we deserve. So when people get into, typically we'll be drawn towards relationships that are familiar to us because that's what we know. So then getting into toxic or abusive relationships, it's like, this feels familiar. Even though it's uncomfortable and frightening, it's also, the nervous system is used to it. And part of experiencing that also impacts a sense of self-worth and what we think we deserve, which is, that kind of toxic or abusive treatment. So people stay in it because they're used to it and maybe don't think that they deserve any better, or if those kind of relationships or treatment were normalized, then they don't realize that it's not okay or not acceptable. And sometimes the they'll be worn down so much through that relationship that the self-worth continues to deteriorate, and then they keep staying. And for others, it can be really frightening to get out of an abusive relationship, particularly if the other person is threatening them if they think to leave. And that can happen in a lot of abusive dynamics. It's like, I'll hurt myself if you leave me. So then they feel like they don't have a choice to get out.
Yeah. Is those belief systems, especially the unworthiness and also thinking that they deserve this certain situation, is that from the emotional memory stored in the body, or is it like a thought pattern, or is it both? Or is it the same thing, the stored memory in the body being a thought pattern and belief system, or are they two separate things?
I think that it can be a bit of both. So we have stored memory in our body that is beyond our conscious understanding. So, for example, in our very, very early developmental years, so as infants, before our prefrontal cognitive, our prefrontal cortex is developed, we don't have belief systems or thoughts necessarily. It's all, oops, I just touched my mic.
That's okay.
It's all body-based, it's all somatic. So there's a lot of imprints that we receive which are completely beyond the mind and are stored in the body. Then as we're developing and we get older and our cognitive mind develops and comes online, then how we feel and our sensation and experience starts to be connected with our belief systems and what we think and how we make sense of our reality.
Wow.
So it could be the two together, or sometimes one and sometimes the other.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they're working together against us.
Well,
or working for us, right?
Well, it's interesting. It's sort of like old software that doesn't get updated until we do our inner work. So, yeah. Yeah.
What are some practices that you live by that you recommend strongly to people that are experiencing a pattern in their life that they don't like and they want to break out of it to really move beyond that belief system or beyond that old software?
I would say that one of the big game changers for me is looking beyond what you think you know. So a lot of the time people try to understand something by analysing, thinking about it, figuring it out, and searching in their conscious knowing or conscious understanding for something, but usually those blocks or blind spots are in our unconscious. So it's kind of like if I lose my car keys at night and there's a big dark space and there's one lamppost and light is shining down on the ground, I'm looking for my keys just in that spot. Why can't I find them? They must be here, I'm looking and they're not here, but I know that I dropped them here, but the keys are out, where the light isn't touching. It's out in the dark space, in the shadow. So a lot of the time where there's something, it's like you feel like you're hitting your head against the wall again and again. Why can't I figure this out? Why can't I change it? Why does this keep happening? I feel like I'm stuck in a loop on a hamster wheel. It's like a lot of the time what you need to see, feel, hear or experience to shift that is not underneath the lamp. It's out in the dark spots in the unconscious. And that's why I love somatic work, because our body is such a powerful gateway into the unconscious rather than just thinking about it and trying to analyse it cognitively. That's helpful too, but I think both need to happen together in a lot of circumstances.
Beautiful. I love the analogy, by the way. That really puts a picture in my mind. Coming to your work with the Temple Nights and all the somatic therapy and the amazing things you do, I've been to a few of your workshops and they're just awesome, like nothing like it I've ever experienced. And they're really beautiful, how you connect people together like that. But what were some obstacles you had to overcome in becoming the woman you are today and doing that kind of work? Did you at one time have like a mediocre 9 to 5 and then you evolved into it, or were you straight into it?
I've never worked 9 to 5.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Good job.
I never wanted to. I would say I worked in IGA in high school.
Yeah.
4 till 8. I didn't do 9 to 5, but I've done
4 to 8. And that's enough.
And then I travelled a lot, and then I studied, and I've had casual jobs. But from the age of, I've never worked 9 to 5. That's a whole other thing to talk about my work history, but we'll
leave that for now.
It's an interesting one. We'll say that for another time.
Okay.
But I think I've kind of known in there somewhere, like there's got to be more than just this, and how much time we spend working. I don't want to spend that amount of time in my life doing something that I'm not juiced up by and lit up by, and, you know, gives me that like, yes, to get out of bed in the morning. So I suppose there wasn't a big transition in terms of habitual work routine into what I'm doing now. But probably the biggest barrier or block or thing that I had to overcome was, I guess, feeling like good enough to do it, you know, kind of, oh, who would want to come to a workshop by me? Or is this idea, you know, will people like this? Is this going to land well? Is this going to, will this be useful? Will it be supportive? Are people going to enjoy it? And I guess some of those self-limitations around my own capability or good enoughness to facilitate what I do. Yeah.
And how did you get over that?
Just practice. Like, I just started at the beginning doing free workshops because, again, that worthiness thing, I didn't know if I had enough value to charge for it. So I started doing stuff for free and then made really low ticket, you know, fees to begin with. And then I noticed, like, wow, okay, people are actually getting a lot out of this. So I guess slowly, in time with experience, my confidence built, and it was just a gradual sort of expansion into that.
Beautiful. Very organic, natural expansion, hey?
Yeah.
And people just getting into relationships, what are some like questions they should be asking, or things you should look out for, like red flags and green flags and things like that? Or do you believe in that notion of red flags and green flags?
That's a good one. I have a little laugh sometimes because some people will just have someone do something that they don't like, or they're not getting what they want, they're not getting their way, and that inner child has a tanty. Oh, that's such a red flag. It's like, it's not a red flag, you're just not getting your way. So I think red flags are thrown around like, you know, here, there and everywhere now, and everyone's a narcissist, and we're, you know, it's like, oh. So I think that it's dished out too readily, these red flags, and I think it's important to acknowledge that everyone's probably got some level of red flag, or at least, you know, orange flag. We've all got our shit, and if you're so focused on everyone else's red flags, I reckon that's a red flag for yourself.
Yeah, well, that's true.
But I think there's varying degrees of, you know, I would say there's probably orange flags, which are like, okay, here's something that is not in relationship. This behavior is not going to work for me. This is not okay for me. I'm not red flagging you because you're just human, and this is something that, you know, many of us do, but this is on the edge here where something's going to have to shift in order for this relationship to work. And, you know, there are other things that I think are red flags, like, you know, abusive kind of behaviors, or things like someone who belittles, humiliates, criticizes you, who raises their voice, calls you bad names, who is deflective and takes very little to no accountability or responsibility in a relationship, someone who is manipulative or controlling. And there's a lot of like overtly controlling behaviours that people have, and coercively controlling behaviours that are a bit trickier to spot, like gaslighting and kind of sneaky things that eventually eat away at someone's sense of self. I've got a whole list of
orange flags.
Red flags.
Oh, red flags.
That I think are, regardless of relationship dynamic, red flags. So,
and by red flag you mean as in like break it off, or like assert your boundaries in a very strong way? Yeah,
red flags as in this behaviour or treatment, under no circumstance is that ever appropriate. In my perspective, but there's also, you know, there's been studies done around this of what groups of psychologists and relationship therapists can agree upon across the field are absolute no-nos in relationship. And that's, about the abusive, controlling, manipulative kind of behaviours that people do.
Okay. Beautiful. I'll have to get that list.
Yeah, I can send it to you.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. Actually, I might post it in the comments of this.
For sure.
What do you think are the causes of procrastination and people not doing what they know they're supposed to do?
That's a good one. I think one of the main causes of procrastination, or underlying that, is actually a fear of failure. So it's like, if I give this a go, I might not get it right, or I might fail. Therefore, my instinct in me is telling me not to do it. So, you know, trying anything new or even stuff that you've done before, I think, a big underlying component of that is fear of failure.
Wow. And is it in the realization of that I'm afraid to fail, is that will stop the procrastination? Or is there a method to really find out that, how do you realize that fear and how do you move beyond it? Have you had experiences with this before?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on what, you know, everyone's had their own unique experience around failure versus success and how they were treated as, you know, growing up for making mistakes, or some people feel terrified of making mistakes and getting things wrong, so they feel crippled with procrastination if they want to try to do something, and it's like this paralysis of the head is telling them, do this, you've got to do this, it's you know, it'll take you 5 minutes, it's super simple, just go, and the body is like paralyzed, going, if I mess that up, you know, I'm going to be punished in some way. They may not realize that that's what's going on underneath, but that's a very common pattern for people to experience. For other people, it's much milder than that. Yeah. But it still kind of halts them or freezes them in that inability to step forward and to take action. Sometimes you can override that response if you can engage your willpower enough to go, do you know what? For the next 20 minutes, I'm just going to do that workout, or I'm just going to get started on that assignment, or whatever it is, and kind of chunk it out like one little step at a time, and sort of bringing the conscious mind in to help to override that paralysis or that procrastination.
Just powering through it.
Yeah, sometimes you can override that. For other people, no matter how much will they exert, just they can't do it. And so what they would need to do is have a look at what is actually going on underneath that, and exploring, okay, what sensations do I notice in my body? Are there any thoughts that come up? Are there any emotions that come up? If I imagine taking one step forward and starting that task, how do I feel? Some people will feel very anxious. Some people will suddenly feel like so exhausted and shut down. And so underneath that is a lot of activation or stress or unresolved emotion or tension of some kind that you can process through, depending on what, you know, that person's unique kind of experience. And sometimes just knowing it and having awareness around it can help just to shift it. It's like, okay, so if I make a mistake, what's the worst possible case scenario? It'll actually be okay. And then the body goes, like,
really exploring the worst case scenario and knowing that it's not a big deal.
Well, sometimes that can be because the brain or the nervous system is going, we might die, you know, in worst case scenario. Yeah. But when you can kind of get mindful or enough awareness around it to go, the worst possible thing is I just have to start again, or, you know, I lose, you know, I lose 10 grand investment, I don't know, depending on what it is. Yeah.
You'll survive.
Yeah, you'll be okay.
Wow, so procrastination is the big one. When it comes to processing emotions, I saw a video of yours about getting rid of emotions. What is the correct way to process an emotion when something is being felt, to really feel it and move through it, rather than trying to suppress or get rid of it? Yeah,
so I would say that trying to get rid of your emotions is a form of invalidation. And if you imagine that a child comes over here and they're like, oh, I just, you know, I hurt my knee, it's really sore, or, you know, whatever it is, and having a bit of a cry. If I go, oh God, would you just go away? Like, I'm trying to get rid of their sadness or their experience. You know, and I use that example to kind of...
Emotional damage?
Well, it's just kind of creating that comparison. If we think about someone else or something else, especially a child, is usually for most people easier to have compassion for. So if I dismiss that little one or disregard them or invalidate them or tell them just to go away, I'm like, oh, I can't be bothered dealing with this. They're going to feel, you know, that sense of emotion is going to get so much stronger, because it's like, I'm not being heard. Now I've got to scream, you know, or whatever it is, it's going to amplify usually. Whereas if I go, oh, sweetheart, you know, that happened, come here, you tell me about it, and I'll give you cuddles, and, you know, soothe them in some way. It's like the emotion or the experience that they're having goes, I feel, I feel heard, I feel seen, I'm valid, I'm okay, I exist, and the system can kind of relax and release that. Maybe they have a little cry and then they're like, let's go play again, So if you imagine that kind of dynamic playing out externally, a lot of the time we've got that playing out internally, where we will feel something, and a lot of our conditioning tells us to try to be happy and okay all of the time, because we don't know how to be with our pain, most people. So it's like, okay, I'm feeling something uncomfortable. There must be something wrong with me. How do I get rid of this? This isn't okay. I'm fucked, or whatever, however our association is to that. If we're trying to get rid of that and make it go away, it's enforcing that sort of invalidation. There's something wrong with me. I'm broken. I'm whatever it is, and the pain's just going to get stronger and louder. Whereas when you're processing emotions, one of the first things that I like to teach people is just normalizing and validating emotional experiences, where you may have heard the saying, what you resist persists. But if you give spaciousness for that to be there and go, sweetheart, fair enough that you're feeling that, that's totally understandable. And a lot of the time, because our emotional selves typically can be quite irrational, our logical mind doesn't know how to relate to our emotional experience. Where if we can't think of a reasonable reason to be feeling that way, we don't know how to validate it or how to hold it or be compassionate for it. So even if it doesn't make sense, if the first thing you start doing is going, fair enough, fair enough that I'm feeling that way. I don't even need to understand it, doesn't need to make sense. It's here, so it must, it must be fair enough on some level. And usually that can start to create some sense of ease of like, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm allowed to feel this. And then it passes. And then, we're like this roller coaster of ebbs and flows of all sorts of different feelings. So processing emotions, I think, is not trying to get rid of your pain or discomfort so that you'll only ever be happy, but it's how to ride those waves with compassion and acceptance for yourself. Because by virtue of being human, we're going to feel pain. It's inevitable. We can't heal our way out of it, but we can learn how to be with that experience.
That makes a lot of sense, because working in mental health, meeting people with depression, one of the biggest things is when they're feeling depressed or low, they start feeling guilty for feeling that way. They start hating themselves and they feel like a burden. They keep adding more and more layers of crap on top of the issue. And if they just accepted that it's okay to feel depressed, it's okay in these times to be down, they can remove that guilt and then all the other negative emotions stacked on top. So how do people build more intimacy and security in their relationships, so they want to feel a little bit closer to their partner?
Oh, that's
Go to your temple night.
Come to temple night. That's a good question. I think that the approach towards that would depend on their attachment style. So to build more intimacy with the partner, a lot of the time people with anxious attachment need to learn how to build more intimacy within themselves and to connect to themselves more deeply, because they're disconnecting from self to try to have intimacy with a partner. But you can't be intimate with someone really and go deep with someone who's not connected to themselves. So someone with anxious attachment needs to reel back their energy a bit from the other person and learn how to connect to their own heart, their own self, and to deepen intimacy internally to be able to share that with a partner. And then someone with avoidant attachment would need to learn how to kind of melt or lower the walls a little bit around themselves or their own heart, and to lean into intimacy with another person. So the anxious one stepping back a little bit. The avoidant person would need to learn how to step forward a little bit and to lean into that and to get more vulnerable and reveal themselves a bit more to the other. And same goes, they need to connect to themselves a bit more too, because avoidants typically are more emotionally disconnected. So they need a little bit of both. But it's then those with disorganized attachment would need to anchor in healthy boundaries and safety, and to feel safe enough to be intimate with another person and to lean in towards that and to develop trust. So how that would look for each of them would depend on where each person's coming from. So it's a bit of a tricky one to answer.
Absolutely. What could that look like as far as practices for couples? Would it be dancing or?
Yeah, I mean, if dancing is something that both people really enjoy, you know, they can find activities that they really enjoy together.
Yeah.
But then there's other things that are just so simple, like, you know, when you see each other, rather than, oh, how was your day, and just lunging into kind of logistics and talking and all of this. It's like taking more moments throughout the day to really be together rather than to kind of engage from their minds together. Normally that feels like a safer place to connect from, is like if we kind of stay in the details and logistics and the this and that and talk about the kids or talk about this or, you know, work or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Whereas I think relating from the heart can be a bit more vulnerable. So if they, you know, get home from work and they see each other, rather than going into debriefing and offloading onto each other, taking a moment just to like look into each other's eyes, you know, just to hold each other for a moment and breathe and melt into each other's bodies and just really feel like they're connected more so from the heart first. And I feel you, I feel that you're here with me, I can feel your heart, I can see you. Now we can kind of debrief and have a chat about things, or taking more moments to kind of hover in the intimate spaces of being together, which might be eye gazing or hugging or slow, gentle touching, or having vulnerable, uncomfortable conversations that maybe have been avoided, or being more authentic about what is being experienced, or requesting for something that they would love to do or explore together. Or I don't know, there could be so many, and if that's going out dancing, or if that's making love, or if that's going to the beach, or going on a road trip, or planning a holiday, or maybe that is doing board games, I don't know, whatever, each to their own of what they feel brings them closer together. And I guess the love languages are another good one to explore for people who don't really know what makes them feel more connected. That's a really cool framework to see. I feel more connected to you when we're touching. I feel more connected to you when all the electronics are off and we're just having quality time together. I feel more connected to you when we're doing things together. I feel more connected to you when we're making things and gifting things to each other. So it's good to see like what actually makes you feel connected to your partner and what creates that sense of intimacy. And it could look very different for different people. And some couples will find that they have very different love languages, or what makes one person feel closer can be a bit triggering for the other person, or doesn't do it for the other person. So it's about meeting each other halfway as well, if you have different gateways into that sense of connection or intimacy.
Now, one of your workshops was called Good Girl Gone Bad. And I was thinking about the whole idea of like bad, and people label things as bad, and sometimes they have to like label themselves as bad to do things that are actually healthy. So things that have been labeled bad or negative by society, people who do those things, which are healthy things, label themselves as bad. Have you seen that sort of coming in people's sort of self-esteem, or their picture of themselves is distorted?
Well, definitely with sexuality, I think. That's the one that jumps out at me the strongest.
I've noticed that myself, working in mental health, is that people that are doing things that are actually healthy for them, whether it's sexuality or whether it's screaming to release their emotions, and they think of themselves as lesser or as bad or negative due to the fact that society labels these things or taboos these things. And I was going to ask you a question of how do people break through those labels and realize that it is okay and it is healthy to do all these things. And I thought that maybe one of your Good Girl Gone Bad was sort of related to that in such a sense.
Yeah, it's sort. Yeah, okay, yeah. I'm following now. So the idea behind that was to kind of start cracking open this conditioning that we typically have. I think it's prevalent for most people in Australian culture, I would say, but particularly for women as well, to be good and to please and to be kind and nice, which are all great things, but to kind of overextend themselves, to always beginning to always say yes, you know, but it typically ends up being at the detriment to themselves, where when they're saying yes to everyone and everything else, they're saying no to themselves and you know, possibly pouring from an empty cup or building resentment because they're doing all these things or being a way that is not authentic for them to make sure that everyone around them is happy. So the good girl is kind of like the people pleaser, caretaker, the one that does everything for everybody else, and then they put themselves last. And that role can sometimes, you know, it's like praised. Oh, look at you! You do everything for everyone else. Well done. You're such a good girl. Or you know, you're so easy. You know, nothing bothers you. You're so great. And it's just like
so chill.
Well done. But underneath that, you know, there's this part inside that's screaming like, well, what about me? What do I want? Do I even exist? Like, do I get to put my needs first? And I feel angry about that actually. And I want to have a boundary around that. And that feels wrong for me, but don't have the permission to express that because it's seen as bad. You know, it's the rebel that is not complying with what everyone wants that person to be for everybody else's benefit. So the good girl gone bad was exploring the conditioning that so many of us have around needing to be that good girl and feeling like it is bad to say no or to have a boundary or to put oneself first or to, you know, go, do you know what, actually I've overcommitted myself, I can't make it to that, or to be a bit wild or sexual or angry or, you know, uninhibited, where there's kind of what we played with in that workshop was two extremes. We've got the girlfriend, the good girl on one side, the bad girl on the other side, but you wouldn't, both of those are unhealthy extremes of the polarity. So that if you're kind of stuck in one extreme of doing something, sometimes by going to the other extreme helps you to find the middle point of balance.
Absolutely.
Because if you try to get the balance, you actually need a bit of that energy or a bit of those traits on the other side to be able to step into that.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah, I really resonate with that as well, because a lot of people that do assert boundaries or sort of do self-care, they feel guilty if they're a bad person for it, but actually no, that's completely healthy to have those things. But sometimes they label themselves as being negative or bad just for asserting themselves, which is a bit sad, but it's still part of the process to start removing the conditioning and those labels that have been handed down by society or family and that sort of stuff. Yeah,
definitely.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so I guess breaking out of that, one of the big things is just getting awareness around it to answer your previous question. But also I think that when there is conditioning around something being taboo or something being bad, that can actually be healthy in a, you know, certain kind of dose of that. Oftentimes there will be shame around that. And so healing or releasing the shame that we have around our feelings, behaviours, desires, you know, expressions of self can help to sort of unlock the other side of our being that maybe we don't feel like we're allowed to express.
True. And what do you think shame really is? It's a tough one, but...
Well, I think shame, you know, it has its benefits where it sort of helps us to stick to some kind of a moral compass in a sense. So if I come over to you and I give you a whack, you know, someone might say to me, Georgia, you can't, what did you do that for? That's not okay. And I feel this natural sense of shame that I've been told, you know, I've just been told not to do that. So, you know, usually kids, we get taught this, or a child that wants to run out onto a road and it's like, hey, come back here. You can't do that. That's not okay. Naturally, they'll feel this sort of sense of shame, but that shame kind of gets imprinted where they remember next time, oh, that was not all right to do that. So it kind of, it's helpful where societally we learn through shame where the moral compass is around what is and isn't okay. And that goes for things like how we treat each other, but also how, you know, for safety, like if we didn't feel that, we might be, you know, doing all sorts of things that are going to hurt ourselves or potentially endanger ourselves. So it has a place.
It's interesting.
But what also can happen is toxic shame, where we feel a sense of shame that instead of just kind of being that sort of barrier or that boundary around appropriate or inappropriate behavior that's sort of driven by that sense of shame, healthy shame, we get toxic shame, which is where it becomes internalized as there must be something wrong with me. I am bad, not I've just done something bad. It's like I am inherently bad or wrong. And when we carry that kind of shame, then it's not healthy.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. It's almost like kids or people who get too much shamed for what they're doing, whether their intention was good or bad, whether it was the example of hitting somebody, it could have been just an intention to play and have fun. And when someone says, no, that's wrong, it's like, well, they may get confused between the activity and am I wrong, and carry that imprint with them.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. But
yeah, definitely. Well, the other, if you go back to sexuality as an example, if a child is, caught masturbating or touching their privates or something, and if the parent says, oh, that's disgusting, that's a bit different to, that's something that you do in your private space. You're allowed to explore that, but, keep that behind, you do that in your bedroom and you get to know yourself with that, and that's, we don't do that in front of each other sort of thing. But if they get shamed, and they might still feel a bit of shame around that, but it's kind of possibly, depends on, a lot of the time, if I feel shamed about my sexuality and I would see my child playing with themselves, then I'm then projecting my shame onto them, and I'm going to shame them for what they're doing.
Now you heal this trauma.
Well, then it gets passed down, and then they feel like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed, I'm humiliated, I'm ashamed that I've done this. And then that sets a pretty hard imprint. So a lot of the time, our own unresolved shame can typically get passed on to our kids, whether that's through what we're doing or how we feel about ourselves or our own emotions or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's funny because there's almost like this big machine of like religions and society and culture that can just generate so much shame on people. Just, it's like this. Yeah. Oh God. Anyway. Yeah. That's why it's good to have people like you doing the work you do to help like mitigate that. Why do people hide from love, do you think?
I think that people hide from love, again, coming back to the, like a self-worth kind of thing. If I haven't been loved in the ways that I longed for, then when love comes my way, it's like, oh, I don't deserve this. I'm not good enough for this. So I'm going to hide away from it or push it away. And if we tie this into shame, if I'm not feeling worthy of shame, within that self-worth or unworthiness is shame. So shame is also a result of abandonment, rejection, and neglect. So growing up, if I've been abandoned, rejected, or neglected in some way, so usually that's the absence of love, then the result of that usually is a sense of shame. There's something wrong with me, that mum or dad isn't loving me, or whoever in my life. So then we carry that imprint, and then in relationship...
You're holding the stomach. Is that where shame is stored?
Typically will be, a lot of people will feel shame here. In the stomach or in the solar plexus.
That's interesting, because when I do breath work, I get like issues with my stomach, so...
Interesting.
Must have a lot of shame, yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah, but I'm going to breath work tonight, so we're just going to get rid of that.
Crank that. So then if I'm getting into a relationship and someone's wanting to love me, it's like, oh, no, I don't deserve this. I'm not good enough for this. So I want to push it away. But underneath that is another part that's like, please love me. And then it's like, oh, no, I don't deserve it.
Oh, so you're back to the anxious and the avoidant.
Possibly, tying into that. So that can be one thing. And the other thing, I think, why people hide away from love is because to open yourself to love or to receive love means opening your heart. And when you do that, there's a greater risk of rejection or pain. True. If you keep your heart guarded and you're hiding from love, then you're not putting it all out on the table, and your risk of being hurt is far less. Yeah. Whereas if you fully open to it and let it in and soak it up, it's like, usually, well, what if this goes? What if they leave me? Can I trust this? Yeah. Is it real? Do they mean this? Is it genuine? It can bring up all of those associations that we have around love. Yeah. And what happens when we get hurt from love, which is not love hurting you but the absence of love or the behavior of the person that hurts.
Yeah, or even like your idea of love at the time. Because sometimes I was thinking that like my idea of love would be a woman loving me, but in actual fact it could be me loving her and also me loving myself and just feeling love in general. But back to my original question was, a new question, sorry. When it comes to opening the heart, what are some practices and also ideas and concepts we can do to open our heart more, to be able to be more secure in relationships, whether we go through a breakup or not, or whether we want to keep ourselves safe from the idea of losing love, but also having that love within ourselves to be able to hold ourselves through anything.
Okay. Can we break that down to one
Yeah, I'm a bit confused in that question myself, but I really want to know some activities to open the heart and to feel safe with our heart open, regardless of circumstances.
Okay.
It shouldn't be easy, but yeah.
Well, I'll start with the first bit. Some practices that you can do to open the heart.
Yeah.
You know, like yoga is an awesome practice to have, where there's physical movements to open the heart physically and energetically. And some people, you notice, you know, people who walk around sort of like this, and their shoulders are sort of hunched in, the back sort of caved in.
Yeah.
And, you know, that posture in itself is it's protecting and closing in the heart. So there are things that you can do with your physical body and posture to, you know, bring the shoulders back a little bit and just feel how can I open my chest or my heart space posture. Physically and explore that. And then other things that you can do are to just simple kind of starting practices are to start to feel the sensation in your heart or in your chest. So if you sort of tune into what you notice in terms of physical sensation in that area, do you feel numb or disconnected from it? Do you feel heat or tingling or like a tension or heaviness, or is there an ache there, or what kind of sensations do you notice in your heart? And sometimes, you know, underneath some of the more uncomfortable sensations are usually unresolved emotions that are sitting there. And naturally, when we feel our pain, we want to contract against it. So starting to be able to process your emotions can be one way to start opening the heart, because we naturally want to protect against our pain. And if there's a lot of pain sitting there, then we want to keep the heart closed so that we don't have to feel that. But just scanning your body, getting aware of what the sensations are, where you feel that the heart becomes more closed, what you experience as things or situations or environments where you feel like a bit of an opening in your heart, and sort of really like consciously anchoring that feeling in can help to kind of stretch that a bit more. Like, oh, I just had such a good laugh at that thing that I just saw, or whatever it is. It's like, oh, my heart feels really open with that, and really bringing your attention to it. And can I expand that feeling a little bit more, or like really let it sit there for a bit of time? And if your heart kind of energetically feels really contracted, then there's like a slow stretching or expansion of that space to be more open. So then that's just a few kind of basic things. Then, I mean, easier said than done. Then the second question that you had, which was how can you keep your heart open?
Yeah, keeping it open and also feeling safe with it open.
Feeling safe with it open,
irrespective of the circumstances, whether it's the loss of love or a loved one or a breakup. But to understand the love within can stay, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think sometimes it is natural for our heart not to be open all the time, because that's quite a vulnerable, exposed space to be in for some people, or in some situations. If you're in, you know, a chaotic or tumultuous or aggressive environment, it's like natural instinct to want to keep your heart protected in those kind of circumstances. So I think there are some environments where it's normal and probably important that the heart is protected and closed. And with certain people, you know, if someone's coming yelling at me on the street, I don't want to keep my heart open to them. It's like, stay out of my space. You know, I'm going to want to have a boundary up. But with people that I trust, with my friends, with, you know, people that I meet who feel like somewhat safe people, keeping the heart open in those circumstances, I think, is a practice to feel safe with that. And boundaries are usually a big one where, you know, I feel safe to keep my heart open because I know that I can protect myself if I need to. When we don't feel safe, generally, or don't have healthy boundaries, usually there's going to be a lot of armor around the heart. And I can give you a little analogy around this if you like, where,
absolutely, yes.
You know, if I feel pretty safe in myself, I might be someone that, you know, maybe leaves my door unlocked during the day, or at home, you know, or maybe isn't. I'm pretty relaxed in my general space. My heart feels pretty open. I'm, you know, might leave my door unlocked, maybe lock it at night or whatever. But I feel generally safe where I am. If I'm someone who, and maybe my heart feels more open most of the time. This is not a 100%, this is how it is all the time, but just a
depends where you live.
Fun little analogy or whatever, but that's again coming back to the environmental thing. If you're in an unsafe, you know, huge crime rate in your neighborhood, you know, it would be normal for you to keep things locked, right? So that environment is not conducive to an open, safe heart necessarily, maybe. So then if I'm someone who feels generally unsafe, I might be in a safe neighborhood, but I'm having security cameras, I've got red alarms, tripwires, things that kind of
roll shutters.
I'm hyper vigilant. It's like I want security all around me to make sure that no one's coming into my space. And so the level of armoring that we have around our heart is usually relative to how safe we feel within ourselves as well. And one way to increase safety within our own being is to have a deep embodiment of boundaries where we know that we can protect ourselves, so we feel safer to be more open because those boundaries can come in when we need them, or we know we can get away, or whatever it is. And people who've been in environments where they have had boundaries transgressed, or where they haven't been able to get away, or where they've been forced to stay in unsafe situations, they'll either have to put walls up to create some sense of safety, or and close the heart down.
It seems just like a traumatic experience will shut down your heart.
Well, you won't. You won't
very,
feel
very firmly, to a point we need to undo a lot of layers to really crack it open again. And you mentioned before that the shame is stored in the stomach. What would be stored around the chest and heart area, or certain emotions there, if there is such a thing?
I think a lot of the time around the chest and heart area is grief and sadness, also happiness and joy, and fear. A lot can be around the chest and the heart area as well. Fear can be throughout the whole body. But when I'm doing body work with people, typically in the chest will be fear, grief, sadness, joy, love, you know, those kind of feelings as well that are more related to the heart. Because
I had an issue where if I was feeling a deep amount of love for somebody and my heart would open, I would instantly feel loss at the same time. And it would be intermixed with it, to the point it was really confusing. Like, whoa, why do I have love and loss at the same time? It's like I can't experience one without the other. I've been really trying to dive deep into that and differentiate the two. But I guess I've got some more work to do. Where do you think that would come from?
There's probably somewhere in there that your associations with love have been associated with loss, which is called overcoupling. So it's where one thing gets entangled in with the other. So you've got love here and you've got loss weaved in. So when one's activated, the other can come up, and it might work when love's activated first, loss comes in. Maybe when loss is activated, love doesn't come in, or maybe it does. I'm not sure how you experience that. But if you've had a situation with love where there's also been great loss, then the two can be combined together. And some people will experience that, like with arousal and shame. The two will be coming in together, or anger and fear, or sadness and guilt, or, you know, like there can be, depending on our associations of our experiences or our conditioning or programming or whatever it is, that you can get overcoupling with different experiences or feelings.
Wow. And the way to separate those two is, again, somatic therapy, or there's some things you can really do to help pull those apart?
I think just getting awareness around that first is a really good step. And then trying to spend a little time in one of those experiences for a little bit. You know, can I kind of separate them? I'm going to put loss over here for a moment and just see if I can sit with that feeling of love for 10 seconds. or something like that. And then if loss comes back in straight away, it's like, okay, take a break. I'm going to put loss to the side. I'm going to visit that in the moment. And I just feel love for a second and see, or 10 seconds or 30 seconds, and start to expand your capacity to be with one of those experiences for a little bit longer. Or you might be curious about the loss and go, okay, I've noticed love is there. I'm going to put that to the side for a second. What do I feel with the loss that comes up? And sit with that for a moment. And that could give an opportunity for any of the unresolved pain around that loss to be released, so that you're kind of letting that go from your being, and love comes in as love.
Yeah. I did a lot of contemplating on this, the love and loss thing. And I thought it maybe, I had the fear of like, wow, if I'm feeling love and I'm feeling loss, I'm manifesting a breakup or something to happen. But I realized that my father had 2 wives who passed away of cancer. So I was wondering, is that like an ancestral thing, or is it like a memory thing that I have in my head that, you know what I mean? Because it's quite interesting, because I'd imagine that's how he would have felt through a lot of his life, having those 2 experiences.
I mean, quite possibly that we tend to imitate or download, if you will, our parents' associations and feelings around things. So there's the possibility that somewhere in there you've learnt that love means loss is.
I really want to know what your definition of Tantra is, because I've heard so many mixed definitions and I'm sort of confused as to exactly what it is.
I was also very confused for like the first few years of exploring Tantra. Like, just someone just tell me what does it actually mean? And, you know, there's all these kind of like, it's everything. So in my understanding of Tantra is that, you know, and I suppose people will, depending on the kind of Tantra or where they learn it or whatever, their definition of that could possibly be different. So I think that's maybe why there are lots of different ways to understand it or explain what it is. My understanding of Tantra is that it is a spiritual practice that teaches us how to connect with God or spirituality or the universe or whatever you want to call it by fully embracing the human experience. And so what I mean by that is, you might be familiar with other spiritual practices that focus on a transcendental approach where it's like, I'm going to deny myself of my anger, my primal desires, my wants. You know, I'm going to practice non-attachment, all of this stuff, like resisting these instinctive or innate human desires or experiences to, you know, purify myself of being human in a sense. You know, I'm kind of dramatizing a little bit. But I want to purify myself of being human so that I can ascend beyond my human self and connect with God. So that's like a transcendental approach where we're going upwards out of the human experience to something higher than ourselves. Whereas I think Tantra is more of an inward and outward approach, where instead of trying to not be human or to purify myself of that, I'm going to go right into the very depths of being human and the full spectrum of that experience and feel that God or the sacred or spirituality is still inextricably interlinked in that experience, and my humanity is not separate from the divine. It's all part of it. And so that's going deep into my emotions, my desires, my feelings, my shadows, my sexuality. And it's also connecting with others to experience that sense of divinity, where I don't necessarily need to search for God out there as a higher power that's beyond me, but I can see the divinity in you, in that beautiful plant that's sitting there on the desk, that God, the universe, divinity is interwoven into all of it. So that's kind of where sexuality is a big part of it as well, because it's feeling that is a sacred energy that we can explore as well, but it's also so much more than that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Good definition. The best one I've heard so far. Yeah, that really makes a lot of sense. When it comes to things like sexuality and really integrating the heart and the full sort of spiritual experience or the energetic experience, how can we transfer sex and something that's not just physical, but into a whole like spiritual experience? Is that too loaded?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I think that to transfer a sexual experience from being more so purely physical into possibly spiritual or deeper than that is by exploring the energy that is also beyond the physicality of that act. So that means that, you know, your sex center would also be connected to your heart and also be connected to your awareness. And what a lot of people do when they engage sexually, I'm just going to super generalize here because I know it's not relevant for everyone, but a lot of people will experience this sense of sex where their hearts may be a bit closed or possibly not connected at all to that experience. They're focused really on the flesh and friction experience of arousal and kind of motivated by getting a release of some sort. And they may not have their consciousness connected to that experience. So that means where it's like our primal desire is driving the car and behind the steering wheel, and then before we know it, they've had sex with someone or have got lost to their lust or whatever, and then afterwards the consciousness comes back and they're like, oh shit, I really shouldn't have done that. So that's kind of just an example of how we can kind of fragment or split from ourselves with sexuality, and to make it a more fully embodied spiritual or energetic experience, which can be really hard to work towards that, but it's having the heart open as well, and being more conscious and aware and really present with yourself and with the other person. I mean, you can also do that through self-pleasure or masturbation as well. But you're sort of, all of you is here and on rocking up for the experience, not just your genitals.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I relate that a lot to eating, in a sense, like people who sort of rush or wolf their food down. With the same thing, if you're rushing it just for the physical purposes, you sort of miss out on the magic of the moment and exactly what it is. That's a good kind of analogy or comparison to make.
So
archetypes.
Archetypes.
You speak a lot about them. What exactly are they, and how does one embody a certain archetype?
So archetypes are kind of like, I mean, you could refer to them as qualities or traits or collective energies, if you will. So, you know, archetypes were a way of recognizing that all of us have these different expressions of ourself internally, but may not have full access to all of them. So there's so many different archetypes out there, masculine and feminine archetypes and other archetypes that are, you know, of the earth, of the world, of different things. But some of the primary archetypes that I have worked with are like the mother archetype, the warrior archetype, the priestess archetype, the lover archetype. There's the inner child archetype. There's what's the other one? The queen archetype. You know, there's a lot of them, and you know, that's just a few. There's, you know, I don't even know how many. A lot. But each of the archetypes have sort of light qualities and shadow qualities to them that you can explore. And a lot of the time, people will have an archetype or a trait or a characteristic or expression of themselves that's more prevalent. So if you think about people in your life that you know, you might be able to think of some people that are like classic, like warrior archetype, like go-getters, saying it how it is, very direct, very, you know, determined and like go kind of thing, or say what they think and feel, or whatever it is. Or someone who might be classic mother archetype, like super nurturing, loves to cook for people, you know, really soft and loving and compassionate and kind. And, you know, someone else who might have a classic inner child archetype, which may be like really playful and like, oh, look at that, and oh, look at that. And, you know, they kind of want to explore the world, and they're creative, and they've got this amazing way of seeing things, and they're kind of connected to that real childlike kind of innocence in them. And then there's also the shadow of each of those. But basically exploring the archetypes is a way of kind of having a bit of a different kind of pathway to expanding our sense of wholeness. So if I'm really strong in a warrior archetype, I might be like a real hard ass or something. And I go, and I might have the tendency to burn myself out or to be a little bit more brash or harsh than maybe I mean to. I could do with a little bit of the lover or the mother archetype to soften me a little bit. So I'm not, like we were talking about before, in extremes. If you're extreme in one, you need something of the opposite spectrum to bring a bit of balance.
Is that in yourself or in a partner?
Well, either person could do it, yeah. But so it's a way of kind of restoring balance and wholeness within by going, which expressions of these might I feel, this is my comfort zone, this is what I'm used to. And other parts it's like, oh, I could do with a little bit more of that energy actually, and embodying these different traits or qualities to bring that expression of self out of dormancy into being here.
Full expression, wow. Do you work much with spirit, whether it's in meditation or with your workshops or anything like that?
I do, but it's maybe not in the sense, like I used to kind of do a lot of ritual and ceremony and sort of calling on the universe and things like that and spirit, but now I feel more like a connection to intuition maybe, where that's coming from. I'm not sure if it's my intuition or universal intuition, I don't know, but there's more like listening to those kind of whispers that I feel or hear, and I'm not so kind of stuck on trying to define where it comes from. It sort of feels a bit more of an embodied experience.
Very flowy, yeah. With the archetypes, it just reminded me of, the Maoris would actually do the haka, where they would summon the god of war before they go into war to feel the warrior energy. So when you're embodying an archetype, is there like, can you draw upon certain forces to really pull it through, or is that just going too far?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely can. Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways, or certain deities or gods or goddesses that you can draw upon, or if you're, wanting to connect more to the mother archetype, you can connect with the mother, the earth, and spend time in nature and really sort of sit on the ground and like feel the earth and the plants and listen to the wind and that kind of thing. Or certain music as well can be really evocative for different energies, or pictures as well. If you've got a photo that represents the energy that you're wanting to draw more of, you can also hang out with people that you feel hold the qualities that you're wanting to embody more of, and kind of what would it feel like if I borrowed a little bit more of that. So if I'm wanting to soften a bit, if I know someone who's super soft and like chilled and relaxed, I would probably hang out with them a little bit more and go, what would it feel like to kind of mimic this a little bit, just to see how that feels in my own body. So you could make it a very spiritual or esoteric kind of experience, but it can also be simplified to just what, day-to-day life in exploring these different energies.
Have you ever heard of Marilyn Monroe using this technique to be more seductive and working with her appeal?
That she did this?
Yeah. Have you heard the story?
No, I haven't.
There's a story that I've repeated before, but I heard this story. I don't know if it's true or not, but there was a friend of Marilyn Monroe, and they were walking on the street together, just on an ordinary street, and she was dressed normally. No one knew it was her. They were just covertly walking through the streets. And Marilyn Monroe turned to her friend and said, "Do you want to see me turn it on?" She's like, "What do you mean turn it on?" It's like, turn on the Marilyn Monroe, the act, the charm. She's like, "Okay, go for it." So she just centered herself and started walking differently and embodying this energy. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, people started noticing her. "Oh my God, that's her." Cars would slow down and peak, and then all of a sudden there was like crowds forming because they recognized it was her. And she's like, "What did you do?" And she's like, "I tune into the energy of Venus, which is the feminine, massive powerhouse planet, which is like, you said the mother archetype is Mother Earth, but the feminine archetype is Venus, the feminine planet." And she's like, she pulls upon the energy and just steps into it. And it just transforms her, which is an amazing story. So, I don't know if it's real or not, but I hope it is.
I've played around with stuff like that before, and I know
you've tuned into Venus?
Well, not tune into Venus like that, but different kind of esoteric or universal or like goddesses and things like that.
What was the one you're drawn to, or one of?
I think for me, one of the most confronting or edgy archetypes to work with was the warrior archetype.
Okay.
And so I spent some time exploring what it would be like to tune into the energy of Kali, which is the deity that's basically...
In Hinduism?
Hey?
She's the one that cuts the heads off, yeah.
Yeah, so she's pretty badass.
Yeah.
But it's like death of the ego and destruction because for a loving intent behind that.
Like a rebirth cycle, sort of like creation, preservation and destruction makes way for more creation.
Yeah. And just, like not, being prepared to ruffle the feathers and just like slice through illusion and things like that. So
beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. I spent some time in India as well and have explored different deity work, and with my previous teacher as well, Chantel Raven, who does a lot of that work too. So I have explored a lot of that, but I guess it's sort of gone on waves of this where it's like going into it quite deeply for a few years. It then feels like I haven't necessarily needed to continue doing that. It kind of feels like I've kind of got it.
Death and rebirth cycles.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Yeah. So was there a period in your life where you just needed to have sort of break certain things down or reinvent yourself or step out as a new version of yourself?
Massively, yeah. It's happened a lot of times.
Okay. Wow.
And sometimes I think like, this is Georgia, and then I realise that it's just another false idea of who I think I want to be. Yeah.
Wow. So during that Kali phase of your life, did you find that really helped you, tuning into the energy and really studying her or knowing about her and just, okay, I can embody this to get through and remove these cords, so to speak, of my old self?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, okay. I think it was really helpful. And, a lot of what we do in working or playing or exploring with energetics is through intention. So whether that's to a deity or whether that's something else, I think intention is the strongest driving force to access those different things. Yeah.
I feel like you've got some really cool stories, which we probably won't go into, but...
Save that for another time.
Yeah, okay. Things like shyness, for example, or social anxiety. Would you have any ideas as to what would be causing that and ways to move through it? Or have we already touched on that in regards to shame?
Yeah, I think it could be related to shame. I also think that can be related to our attachment as well. Because, if I'm in a group of people or if I'm in connection with anyone, it's going to activate my attachment patterning. And if I don't feel confident or safe or secure to be myself, then chances are I'm going to feel shy or anxious around other people. And a lot of the time underneath that, I think, is a fear of rejection, where shyness is kind of like the holding back of who I am, because if I show it, then I may possibly I might get rejected. And some people are quite shy at the start, and then it takes them a little while where it's like, okay, yeah, I can be myself here, and they'll come out of their shell the safer that they feel, knowing that they're being accepted and included. And with social anxiety as well, I think that working with the fear of rejection, as well as being able to have healthy boundaries, can really help with that experience of anxiety.
Beautiful. Another question for you. Are there any ways we can work on being more aware of what is our intuition telling us we shouldn't be somewhere versus, this is shyness or social anxiety, and where do we draw that line? Because sometimes I feel anxious in certain circles, but I feel totally fine doing the same thing in other circles. I'm like, am I shy, or am I just not meant to be where I was, if that makes sense? Do you have any experiences with that, like really fine-tuning that intuition and knowing?
Well, I've had experiences of that where if I'm hanging out with my friends, people that I know, feeling more confident because I feel safer to be myself. Or if I feel, if I'm facilitating a workshop or I'm helping with something, it's kind of like I have my role in that space, so I feel more confident to be there and in control, in a sense. Whereas if I go, and I've experienced this a lot, if I go hang out with my partner's friends, I don't know anyone, it's an unfamiliar environment, I don't have my usual role that feels comfortable for me, then I have experienced social anxiety in those environments, and it's feeling out of control or unfamiliar, or I have to re-navigate how I relate to people in a way that I'm not used to. So in my experience of it, there has been some stuff for me to look at when I've experienced social anxiety, and I think that generally speaking for others, you know, to learn where that line is between what's your intuition telling you this environment is not right for me and I actually need to go, versus this is an anxiety and there's actually something deeper than that playing out. I think that takes getting to know yourself and getting really curious about what's underneath this and knowing yourself well enough to go, nah, I just need to go home because this isn't right, versus there's a bit of a charge or a trigger here. That's something that I can look at further so that I feel safer to be in different social environments.
Beautiful. Awesome. There's a question I've been dying to ask you too. I saw your video on Instagram about it. But supporting friends or family members through a toxic relationship or an abusive relationship, and obviously knowing our boundaries there and also playing it safe. Because I've had this experience with a lot of friends of mine, even family members, where I may have overstepped and I didn't realize. I'm like, oh, okay, I really shouldn't have said that. But yeah, how do we toe that line and really how do we help someone in that situation?
Oh, it's really tough. It's really hard because, you know, sometimes they need someone to speak out and go, hey, I've noticed that, you know, you're not yourself. You seem, you know, this doesn't seem healthy for you. I think one of the ways that creates a bridge to having a conversation with someone in a relationship where you're concerned for their health is actually by asking them if they're open to you sharing something that you've noticed. So rather than coming in and going, hey, what are you doing with this person? This is not good for you. Usually that can put someone on the defense.
True.
Whereas if you go, hey, I've had some concerns. I'm feeling a little bit worried about something that I've noticed with you. Are you open to me sharing with you what that is? Once they say yes, they feel like that, you know, they've given permission. They're going to be more receptive to it, and they feel like they're now part of that conversation rather than you kind of imposing your opinions onto them. So usually I find asking permission for feedback can be a gateway in to being more heard on that. And then also, you know, moving through your own stuff around as well can help you to communicate it more clearly rather than sort of shaming or judging them for that, because then that also might put them on the defense. But I've known people who, you know, they've heard it 20 times or 30 times, 40 times from their family members. You've got to leave this relationship. This is not good for you. And they can't hear it until they choose that for themselves. So it is a very difficult line to walk between bringing that to their awareness, expressing your concern as a loved one, but also realizing that they're going to make that choice when and if they do. And, you know, I've experienced people saying, do you know, like, I actually don't think this is good for me. And it's like, I've been telling you that for 3 years, you know, but they're just, it's kind of blind to it. So it is a really difficult one to approach. And hard for me to give a one-size-fits-all way to do that.
That's fair enough, yeah.
But I think that there is value in, you know, expressing to someone your concerns because you love them.
That's true.
And whether or not they act on that straight away, ideally it would plant a little seed there where you can't force their hand on something, but you can kind of keep, you know, letting them know what you're seeing. And not everyone's going to want to hear that either, because then they've got to confront, you know, why they're in that relationship or whatever it is.
And sometimes hearing it or saying it out loud makes it more real than what it is.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think we all have like cognitive blind spots. We just don't notice or just dull out over time. But things like asserting your boundaries or having healthy confrontation, how could you go about that for someone who has like anxiety thinking about putting up a boundary or expressing themselves in that way?
In relation to the last question, or is this a new point?
It's a new point.
Okay.
They're kind of entwined, but yeah, healthy confrontation.
Healthy confrontation. I mean, I think that that's something that you gradually feel safer in with practice and over time. It can be really hard for people to find their voice in confrontation or to say what they're actually feeling if there's fear there or they're feeling unsure. But you know, practicing that helps to like building a muscle. It's like the more you do it, it's like, oh, okay, I am okay. And this is actually safe for me to have these conversations or to express boundaries. I think it could be good to get support around that, or to have some friends around you that you can kind of debrief around, here's what I want to have a conversation around. Do you have any feedback for me? You know, whether that's with the person that you're confronting or getting some kind of advice for confronting someone else. And then it's also good to look at what actually comes up for you, because there's a lot that can be done to process those fears and anxieties, which can make you feel safer to have that confrontation. If you've got some old kind of unresolved fear there, that when you go to confront someone or to set a boundary, you're now not a 35-year-old man, you've just regressed back into a 6-year-old boy who is speaking to dad, you know, in the unconscious projection. There's a lot that you can do to resolve those prior dynamics that will then shift you into present time awareness, so that when you're having that conversation or setting your boundary, you're here as your adult self, rather than the inner child that's terrified of, you know, the consequences of what might happen. So that would be my advice, is that's really cool. Do some healing work on what comes up in anticipation of that. Yeah,
because I get that as well sometimes. I have to confront somebody, whether it's a friend or family, in something that may offend them, or I get this sense of guilt of, like, oh, how will they react? But it's not really, that's not my work in a sense. But I can feel like a 6-year-old kid again, and until I announce it, and then I'm like, I start feeling better in the process. But it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
When it comes to sex and energy exchange, do you think that our culture has an unhealthy idea of what sex is, and things like one-night stands and that nature? Like, are they actually dangerous energetically, or things of that nature? Or
what do you mean dangerous?
When it comes to like an energetic exchange, I heard that when you're intimate with somebody, their energy and your energy is flowing through each other, and it can stick to you, or you become like the people that you are intimate with. And things like one-night stands, are they actually toxic for our energetic system, or is it more so depending on situations?
I think it depends on the situation and each individual.
Yeah.
So for some people, you know, they might genuinely feel totally fine with a one-night stand. For other people, it brings up, you know, a lot of shame or guilt or grief, or, you know, whatever feelings come up with that, if they don't feel like they've fully honoured themselves in that decision. So it might be, you know, something that they maybe come to regret afterwards, or I think it totally depends on each person.
Each person, okay.
Yeah.
But is it true that during sex, energy does transfer through both individuals? Is that something that does happen, or is that...
I think it depends
on are there ways to stop that, or like, I don't know how this actually works, but I just heard of these things on Instagram.
Good old Instagram.
Yeah.
I think it depends on your level of openness. So for example, if I'm making love with my partner and my heart's open and his heart's open, then there's going to be a circulation of energy through our hearts, our sex centers, and there's a beautiful merging that happens with that, where we're very energetically connected and there is a genuine exchange that's happening.
Yeah.
If I go off and have a one-night stand, my heart's closed and I'm just engaging with my sex and it's just flesh and friction based, and I'm not energetically open to that person, then the amount of energy exchange or merging or connection that's happening in that is going to be very, very different to what would be if my partner and I are energetically open to each other, emotionally, energetically and sexually. But in terms of, you know, if you go back to the one-night stand situation, typically speaking, because a woman's body or a man's body, if he is receiving penetration, or whoever's body, the one who is being penetrated, usually they are the one that are receiving more of the other person's energy because it's going into them. And if someone, you know, I guess with some of the tantric theories or principles as well, it's like if someone ejaculates inside as well, then whoever is receiving the ejaculate is going to be receiving more of that person's energy, and the other person might not actually take on that much. So that is just one way of viewing it.
Yeah. Do you have any practices or techniques to keep your energy safe if you're going to a shopping centre or going to certain areas and you may notice that things get sort of stuck to you? Or how do we sort of release energy that's not ours or old energy that no longer serves us?
There's lots of different things that you can do. I think part of it is energetic boundaries.
Yeah.
Like if, you know, and that comes with boundary work and embodying that, you know, you're not taking on stuff from your surroundings and you don't have to, and it's not your job to either.
Yeah.
It's sort of energetically you're more boundaried from the environment around you, whereas some people don't really have strong boundaries, generally speaking, and anything's kind of coming in and coming out and they feel like they maybe don't have much control over it and get very impacted by what's going on around them. So things that you can do are like, I love like freshwater showers, like getting your head wet, cleansing the whole body, or jumping in the ocean or in a pool or in a body of water is usually quite a cleansing practice energetically. Then there's things like sage or incense, or even in having intention to, you know, if you feel like, oh, I've taken something on from my environment, or I feel like something's kind of sticking to me, it's like, where is it? See if you can identify what the sensation is. Maybe you feel like, oh, this heaviness, real heaviness here. And you might just kind of like have an intention just to kind of like flick, like that's wipe it or swish it or flick it away. Or you could, you know, again, take a shower and cleanse that away, or just, you know, have that intention within yourself of like, this is not mine, I'm giving it back. And, you know, intention is a really strong way that you can use anything at all to sort of cleanse yourself energetically of things. And then some people swear by crystals or certain essential oils or different things like that that can be cleansing tools. So it really depends on...
Yeah, you've got a lot of knowledge and a lot of strategies.
Can I add something to that last one?
Yeah, of course.
I think that another really useful tool for kind of decompressing or resetting energetically is actually music and dance as well. And kind of just like shaking, moving the body, singing, listening to music, and just having that intention to sort of let go of the day or the space you were in, and sort of resetting and stepping back into yourself.
Yeah, I like that one. Yeah, that definitely works for me. Now, have you actually worked with couples as well on intimacy issues with them and things of that nature?
Yep.
Are you seeing any things or common themes that are coming between men and women? Like any ideas or beliefs or things of that nature that really,
That's a massive question. Things that are coming between men and women as genders generally, or do you mean in couples?
I would probably say both. Just like any ideas or belief systems or things that are really blocking men and women to, and their sacred union, or just getting along as they should, in a sense.
Where to start with that one? I actually did a couple of weekends with the school that I taught for before, which was the Art of Loving Men and the Art of Loving Women. And that was a full weekend around understanding the innate differences between men and women, and where the frustrations can come in because of that misunderstanding of the other. So I think that there are, you know, a lot of maybe assumptions or misunderstandings that we can have of the opposite sex and the way naturally that they function or feel. And you could take this further away from it just being about men and women and gender, and about masculine and feminine energy, or yin and yang energy, and how different those two are. And someone who's more polarized in one of those will find it harder to understand the other, until they've sort of embodied that in themselves or get that understanding themselves. But I think there are a lot of misunderstandings in terms of beliefs and things like that. I think if you distill it down, a lot of it can be the societal roles or ideas that we have about each other and what each other should be doing in relationship. And the other thing is that I think there's a lot of issues around, you know, our experiences of men or women, and then projecting that onto the partner, where it's like, if I've had a negative experience with a man, I'm now going to lump all men into that and go, well, all men are like this. And, you know, a man might do the same, or we could do it about whatever gender, it doesn't really matter. But a lot of the time it's like, all women are like this. and our very first imprints come from our mum and dad. So with couples, what happens a lot is one of them is projecting mummy onto the other, and their inner child's wanting mummy to love them in all the ways that they didn't, but they're no longer relating adult to adult. They're now relating from unconscious inner child to mother projection. And the other way around as well, the other is often projecting daddy onto the other and relating from unconscious inner child to dad. And all of those associations and programming experiences and attachment stuff gets projected onto the other person or replayed in relationship. And a lot of people don't realize how much their relationships with their opposite sex parent or same sex parent actually influences the adult relationships and the repetition of those patterns.
Wow. That's a big one.
It is a big one.
If you're given the opportunity to speak to 1 billion people or implant an idea into the collective consciousness, what would that idea or message be?
Gosh, there would be so much that I'd want to say. It's such a big question. I feel like this kind of like this pressure of like what would be the most impactful message to bring across to that many people. And I think that part of that message would be that I feel as though that each individual is responsible for their part in reconnecting to themselves and their hearts and to doing the inner work required to amplify that ripple effect and that wave out to really making a change in this world. And I think that a lot of people get so caught up in these materialistic things or what others are or aren't doing or try to control everyone and everything around them, and that the biggest impact anyone, I think, can have in their own life is actually by going within and letting go of trying to get control over everything, connecting to themselves in their own heart. And if we all did that, like, the world would massively change. But there's so much that we have no control over and can exhaust ourselves trying to grasp onto or trying to control. But by being here and connecting to self and coming home to who we actually are, it is what the world massively needs. And it's a game changer in that sense, the ripple effect out that, if you're connected to your own heart, you can touch so many other hearts and it just keeps amplifying. But yeah, we need each individual to do the inner work and to be brave enough to confront themselves and to love, start loving or accepting who they are, to spark that change of how we engage in the world and how we treat each other. And it all starts from within. That would probably be one thing. Beautiful. That's amazing. And this is going to be my last question now. Okay. A little more simpler though. What is the best gift a man can give to a woman? And what do you think is that, from your experience, that women actually want in relationships or just in life in general? I think that women really want their heart to be deeply felt, held, seen and heard. And I think they yearn for the full presence of a man that's not trying to change her, fix her, come up with solutions, but deeply feels her. And I think that a lot of women are longing for a lot more emotional intimacy than they're getting. And even, some people, a lot of women will try to seek, and men, anyone, try to seek emotional intimacy through sex, but it's not really how that cup within gets filled. So, did you ask me what advice would I give to men for women? No, I asked them,
what's the best gift a man can give to a woman?
Yeah, I think it would be presence, and the depth and vulnerability of his own heart.
Beautiful. And reversing that, what's the best gift a woman can give to a man, and what do you think it is that men really want and yearn for, in your experience, that is?
In my experience working with people around this, I think men really want and yearn for to be trusted, and that's trusting, not being micromanaged or emasculated by a woman, but trusted that he's got it and that he's got her, so that she feels safe enough to open to him, and to be acknowledged, to hear, I'm proud of you. Thank you so much for being you. Thank you for what you do. Thanks for all the little things that I notice, like taking the bins out and providing and go to work and doing all these things that I think can be taken for granted a lot. And men give and do and create and build so much. And I think that it's almost seen as this you're a man, so you have to do that. And I don't think men get enough acknowledgement in their relationships for what they actually contribute, because it's seen as, well, you should just automatically do that.
Yeah. I love those answers. Amazing. Just one last one. What is it you think that love really is, besides just a feeling or an emotion?
Besides a feeling or an emotion?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. I think love is an experience of the heart that is like its own unique, beautiful energy or expression in itself. And yeah, I'm not really sure how else to define it, but I think it's what we're all looking for.
Yeah, it's more so have to be experienced and defined, I suppose, because it's very hard to define. It's a very tough question, so your answer was beautiful, by the way. That is everything. Thank you so very much. Yeah.
Thank you for the awesome